Well, how y'all doing this morning? We're going to get a little comfortable up here, and we have our warm adult beverages. That just means they have caffeine in them. And since the theme for today is joy, we thought that maybe instead of talking to you about joy, that we would share a couple of stories that might offer you the experience of joy. How's that sound this morning? All right, so Kara's going to start out. What do you have for us this morning, Kara?
Well, I have a story that was written by Pearl S. Buck. Some of you may know Pearl. And it's called Christmas Day in the Morning. He woke suddenly and completely. It was 4 o'clock, the hour at which his father had always called him to get up and help with the milking. Strange how the habits of his youth clung to him. 50 years ago, and his father had been dead for 30 years, and yet he waked at 4 o'clock in the morning. He had trained himself to turn over and go to sleep. But this morning, it was Christmas. He did not try to sleep. Why did he feel so awake tonight? He slipped back in time, as he did so easily nowadays. He was 15 years old and still on his father's farm. He loved his father. He had not known until one day, a few days before Christmas, when he had overheard what his father was saying to his mother. "Mary, I hate to call Rob in the mornings. He's growing so fast and he needs his sleep. If you could see how he sleeps when I go in to wake him up. I wish I could manage alone." "Well, you can't, Adam." His mother's voice was brisk. "Besides, he isn't a child anymore. It's time he took his turn." "Yes," his father said slowly, "but I sure do hate to wake him." When he heard these words, something in him spoke. His father loved him. He had never thought of that before, taking for granted the tie of their blood. Neither his father nor his mother talked about loving their children. They had no time for such things. There was always so much to do on the farm. Now that he knew his father loved him, there would be no loitering in the mornings and having to be called again. He got up after that, stumbling blindly in his sleep, and pulled on his clothes, his eyes shut, but he got up. And then on the night before Christmas, that year he was 15, he lay for a few minutes thinking about the next day. They were poor, and most of the excitement was in the turkey they had raised and mince pies his mother made. His sisters sewed presents, and his mother and father always bought him something he needed. Not only a warm jacket, maybe, but something more, something such as a book. And he saved and bought them each something too. He wished that Christmas, when he was 15, he had a better present for his father. As usual, he had gone to the 10-cent store and bought a tie. It had seemed nice enough until he lay thinking the night before Christmas. He looked out of his attic window and the stars were bright. "Dad," he had once asked when he was a little boy, "what is a stable?" "It's just a barn," said his father, "just like ours." Then Jesus had been born in a barn, and to a barn the shepherds came. The thought struck him like a silver dagger. Why should he not give his father a special gift too, out there in the barn? He could get up early, earlier than 4 o'clock, and he could creep into the barn and get all the milking done. he'd do it alone. Milk and clean up, and then when his father went in to start the milking, he'd see it all done. And he would know who had done it. He laughed to himself as he gazed at the stars. It was what he would do, and he mustn't sleep too sound. He must have waked 20 times, scratching a match to look each time at his old watch. Midnight, 1:30, and then 2:00. At 2:45, he got up and put on his clothes. He crept downstairs, careful of the creaky boards, and let himself out. The cows looked at him, sleepy and surprised. It was early for them, too. He had never milked alone before, and it seemed almost easy. And he kept thinking about his father's surprise. His father would come in and get him, saying that he would get things started while Rob was getting dressed. He'd go to the barn, open the door, and then he'd go and get the 2 big empty milk cans, but they wouldn't be empty. They wouldn't be empty, they wouldn't be waiting, and they wouldn't be empty. And they'd be standing in the milk house filled. "What the?" he could hear his father exclaiming. He smiled and milked steadily. 2 strong streams rushing into the pail, frothing and fragrant. The task went more easily than he had ever known it to go before. Milking for once was not a chore. It was something else, a gift to his father who loved him. He finished. The 2 milk cans were full, and he covered them and closed the milk house door carefully, making sure of the latch. Back in his room, he had only a minute to pull off his clothes in the darkness and jump into bed, for he heard his father up. He put the covers over his head to silence his quick breathing. The door opened. "Rob!" his father called. "We have to get up, son, even if it's Christmas." "All right," he said sleepily. The door closed and he lay still, laughing to himself. In just a few minutes, his father would know. His dancing heart was ready to jump from his body. The minutes were endless. 10, 15, he did not know how many. And he heard his father's footsteps again. The door opened and he lay still. "Rob!" "Yes, Dad?" His father was laughing, a queer, sobbing sort of laugh. "Thought you'd fool me, did you?" His father was standing by his bed, feeling for him, pulling away the cover. "It's for Christmas, Dad!" He found his father and clutched him in a great big hug. He felt his father's arms go around him. It was dark and they could not see each other's face. "Son, I thank you. Nobody ever did a nicer thing." "Oh, Dad, I want you to know I do want to be good." The words broke from him on their own will. He did not know what to say. His heart was bursting with love. He got up and pulled on his clothes again, and they went down to the Christmas tree. Oh, what a Christmas! And how his heart had nearly burst again with the shyness and pride as his father told his mother and made the younger children listen about it, how he, Rob, had got up all by himself. The best Christmas gift I ever had, and I'll remember it, son, every year on Christmas morning, so long as I live. They had both remembered it, and now that his father was dead, he remembered it alone. That blessed Christmas dawn, when alone with the cows in the barn, he had made his first gift of true love. This Christmas, he wanted to write a card to his wife and tell her how much he loved her. It had been a long time since he had really told her, although he loved her in a very special way, much more than he ever had when they were young. He had been fortunate that she had loved him. Ah, that was the true joy of life, the ability to love. Love was still alive in him. It still was. It occurred to him suddenly that it was alive because long ago it had been born in him when he knew his Father loved him. That was it. Love alone could awaken love, and he could give the gift again and again. This morning, this blessed Christmas morning, he would give it to his beloved wife. He could write it down in a letter for her to read and keep forever. He went to his desk and began his love letter to his wife. My dearest love. Such a happy, happy Christmas. The end.
Well, there's some joy for you. Yeah, I think everybody at some point in school probably had to read The Good Earth by Pearl Buck, and I had no idea that there was this lovely little Christmas short story floating around out there. So thank you for finding that and bringing it to us today.
You're welcome.
My story is called Christmas Special Delivery, and it's from a book called A Christmas Dozen, Christmas Stories to Warm the Heart by Steve Burt. Who's taking care of Clyde's cat while he's in the hospital? Asked the tall man standing in front of the Orient General Store. An older man sat on the front step, feet flat on the sidewalk, elbows on his knees. A trail of aromatic smoke, the sweet smell of cherry, drifted up out of the handsome brown pipe in his mouth, and his lips made a dry puck-puck sound as they drew smoke in through the curved mouthpiece. Clyde's cat? He gave a puzzled look and kept puck-pucking on his pipe, hardly looking up at the question asker. And then, as if an afterthought, he said, "Oh, you're referring to Sardine." Imagine that, a cat named Sardine. "Well, of course he means Sardine, Delbert P. Coffin," came his wife's sharp voice from behind him. "You were going to play your little guessing game with Tink, weren't you, dear?" she said impatiently. Delbert Coffin's cheeks never moved, though his lips continued to pull on the pipe. He said nothing. "Well," the big woman demanded, hands on her hips, "you going to tell Tink about that cat or not?" Delbert paused a second too long, so his wife jumped in and turned to the tall man and exclaimed, "Sardine is at the vet's, Tink, until Clyde gets out of the hospital, and it's a toss-up which one of them will be released first. But if Sardine gets the okay to go home, Delbert and I can board him at our place until Clyde's out and about." Yes, Sardine was Clyde the postmaster's cat. Clyde's fall from a stepladder while painting the bottom of his boat had left him with 2 broken legs and Sardine with a fractured pelvis. Everyone in Orient knew Clyde Daggett. He'd been the small town's postmaster for 35 years. And they all knew Sardine, a stray cat who showed up at the post office out of nowhere one day. Whenever you stopped in for your mail, there would be Clyde, smiling and ready to help at the mail window. And there on the counter, in a cardboard box that once held 500 sheets of letterhead, lay Sardine, curled up and comfortable, often asleep. The post office cat, everyone called him. He even made the front cover of the Suffolk Times, Eastern Long Island's weekly newspaper, peering lazily over the lip of the box. The post office cat quickly caught on, a curiosity to visitors and a fixture in the community, almost as much a fixture as Clyde himself. Clyde Daggett knew everybody and had helped more people with zip codes and Christmas packages than Carter's has pills, as he used to say. Never missed a day of work for sickness, Amazing in itself, considering how many germs he came in contact with each day. But now he was laid up at Eastern Long Island Hospital, 5 miles away in Greenport. Then, who's taking over the nativity pageant? Tink asked, this time directing his question at Velma. Karen Sweeney, the minister's wife, she said. She's quite capable. The show must go on, Tink, interjected Delbert matter-of-factly without looking up, never missing a puck on his pipe. Oh, Delbert, Velma half-whined, it's not a show, it's a pageant. A nativity pageant is very different from a show. Delbert looked up, winked at Tink, and said to his wife, that's what you think. When them kids get into that pulpit and the little ones get to squirming, it's a show. Tink laughed out loud, and Velma stifled a laugh and pretended to look stern. She finally gave in and started to giggle. I suppose so, Delbert, she said. They are cute, aren't they? Cute don't half describe it, he said. Remember Jimmy was a shepherd and lost his hold on that wooden crook and it bounced off of Mary's head and knocked the frankincense out of the king's hand, which fell into the manger and spilled that god-awful perfume all over. And remember poor old Reverend Longley the next Sunday? He could barely get through the sermon because his eyes were watering so, Delbert said. And the stink, Tink chimed in. I can still smell it when we shampoo the carpet by the pulpit. Delbert Coffin held the pipe in his hand, now alternating between laughing and wheezing and coughing. The commotion attracted the attention of 3 old ladies who were leaving the post office next door. What's going on, Velma? One of them asked. Delbert okay? Is it a heart attack? Asked one of the others. Shall we call the rescue squad? Asked the third. But when the ladies saw that Velma's eyes were filled, not with fear, but with laughter, they relaxed. No thank you, she told them. Delbert is fine, at least in a manner of speaking. A little odd, perhaps, but health-wise, he's fine. Then she added, we were just reminiscing about past pageants at the church. Oh, said one of the ladies, Eunice Davis. We were talking about that with Inez in the post office. Our sardine wasn't in his box on the counter, so Inez told us what happened. Then Tricia, that young fill-in postmistress from Riverhead, said that she's had maybe hundreds of people in asking about Clyde and our post office cat. Velma nodded her head. Good to hear folks are concerned. And what about the nativity pageant? Is it still on? Uni Davis continued. I mean, with Clyde in the hospital. After all, he's directed the pageants for, oh gosh, it must be 30 years now. About as long as he's been postmaster, I'd guess. When Uni paused to take a breath, Tink shared his newly gained information. The pastor's wife is directing, he said. Uni Davis and her 2 friends went silent. It was as if a brick had dropped from the roof and crashed on the sidewalk in front of the general store. How's Clyde going to feel about that? Eunice Davis said with a degree of snappiness in her voice. Delbert Coffin looked blankly at his wife, then at his friend Tink and said, I don't know, he said, knowing better than to get into it. He passed the buck. How do you think you'll feel about it, Velma? Velma Coffin's face took on a fretful look. I don't think, she said, measuring her words, I don't think Clyde will mind someone else directing in a pinch. But it'll be hard on him not to be there. After all, night after tomorrow's the pageant, and he'll have to spend it in the hospital. And without his cat, Tink chimed in. I feel sorry for him. And everyone nodded their agreement. Merry Christmas, Clyde. Clyde Daggett looked up from his hospital bed. He'd been half asleep, and hearing his name had surprised him. Oh, hi, Delbert, he said, shaking his head to clear away the cobwebs. Merry Christmas to you, too. He pulled on the adjustment lever at the side of his bed, raising himself to the sitting position. But it's still a few days until Christmas, I believe. Well, yes it is, Tink said from the doorway behind Delbert, but we figured, since it was pageant night, and you couldn't make it to the church to direct, you'd be you'd be feeling a bit out of sorts. Depressed, Tink. Depressed is what you mean to say, Delbert corrected. He shook his head in mock disgust. Out of sorts is advertising talk for, diarrhea or constipation. If Clyde can't make the play, he feels depressed, not out of sorts. All right, the man in the hospital bed said. I'm not out of sorts. I'm not depressed. I'm what the kids today call bummed out. I'm bummed out. I miss the pageant. I miss work, and I miss my sardine. After an awkward moment, Delbert said, pointing to Clyde's 2 leg casts, "You taking autographs?" "People still do that," Clyde said. "I don't know about other people, but this people still do," Delbert said, withdrawing a pen from his pocket and making an exaggerated flourish in the air over the cast. Careful, careful, Clyde said, only half kidding. "That's one already broken in 2 places and the other in 3, so I don't need you falling on me." Delbert and Tink each signed the 2 casts. "So how's it going here, Clyde?" Delbert asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Food's good," the postmaster said. "Nurses are nice. Bedpans are room temperature unless they've just washed them." Delbert and Tink laughed. "Everyone misses you down at the post office," Tink said. "Well, tell them I miss them too," Clyde said. "Look at all those cards on the windowsill. And there's 5 bouquets of flowers there, all from yesterday and today. Folks have been great." "You deserve it," Delbert said. "Thanks," Clyde answered. "How's my sardine?" "Sardine's fine, just fine," Tink offered. "Well fed, getting a lot of attention, healing nicely, they say. He's fine." "I miss him," Clyde said. I miss people too. Don't get me wrong, but Sardine is, well, you know what I mean, family." "Yeah, we know," Tink said. "For us it was our dog Buddy. When he died 2 years ago, well, he said in a cracking voice, we still miss him." The air in the room started to feel heavy, so Clyde asked, "So how'd the pageant go tonight?" He looked at his wristwatch. "It must be over an hour ago, right?" Delbert stood up from where he'd been sitting on the edge of the bed and walked to the window. "It went well," he said. "So well, they're talking about taking the show on the road." He drew back the curtain and unlatched the window, pushing it open. "Thank God for first floor rooms. Here's the road show now." And there on the frosty lawn stood Mary and Joseph and the manger crib. Mary cradled the babe in her arms, a doll wrapped in towels. Karen Sweeney, the pastor's wife, appeared right outside the window, an open book in her hands. She began to read, and her voice rang out loud and clear. "In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus. Shepherds and wise men and angels appeared, and when Karen Sweeney read, and a multitude of the heavenly host appeared, more than 100 people, half of the town of Orient, walked into view to encircle the manger, singing, 'Hark the herald angels sing.'" Clyde watched wide-mouthed. After 30 years, finally able to enjoy the drama as an observer rather than a director. Delbert shrugged too, moved by the display of public affection, and said to Clyde, "My friend, you seem to have an embarrassment of riches. People love you." At a loss for words and close to tears, Clyde said, "I suppose they all want to sign my cast." To which Delbert retorted, "Well, this is a cast party, Clyde." The moment didn't stay frozen long, for the spell was broken by a voice. Not Karen Sweeney's, but a voice close by the window. "Mr. Daggett, you in there?" It was Buzzy Buswell, whose voice was beginning to change. He was dressed up as a shepherd. "Yes, Buzzy, I'm in here," the postmaster answered. "Great," the boy said. "Hope you're on your feet again soon. Now, sit tight and hold for special delivery. Here's a Merry Christmas from a very special sheep." In through the window came a familiar box, a box which once held 500 sheets of letterhead. Delbert received it and passed it along to Clyde. A scrap of wool covered the box, and at one end of it the fleece began to lift. Out peeked a pair of charcoal gray eyes, a tiny wet nose, and furry ears. "Sardine," the postmaster said, reaching for the box. "Be careful," Delbert cautioned. "He's in about the same condition you are, Clyde, and we've only got him out on bail for another couple hours. The vet wants him in early." "Ah, the vet can wait up a while," Clyde said. "Sardine's used to staying up late for David Letterman." "Meow," said the cat in sheep's clothing. "And a Merry Christmas to you too," exclaimed Clyde as he stroked Sardine's neck lightly and tickled his ears. "And Merry Christmas to all of you," Clyde yelled out the window, "and many thanks." Outside in the crisp night air, more than 100 voices softly sang Silent Night, Holy Night, all is calm, all is bright. No one except Delbert and Tink signed Clyde's cast that night, because by the time the singers had finished Silent Night, Clyde the postmaster had fallen fast asleep in his hospital bed with Sardine the post office cat curled up in the box on his chest. Over the next 3 months, nearly 300 people signed Clyde's 2 souvenir casts where they hung beside the service window at the Oriat post office. However, once the story made the papers, more than 10 times as many people, all the locals plus thousands of visitors, stopped by to sign the old letterhead box on the counter in which Sardine, the post office cat, spent his days catnapping. Someday, Clyde insists, that box will wind up in the Smithsonian, somewhere between Archie Bunker's armchair and Mr. Rogers' sweater. And there's no doubt it'll get there either, because stamped across its end are the words, "Christmas Special Delivery." The end.